As many of you know, about a month ago I was out overlanding in the Central Oregon desert and I had a fire underneath the Bronco. Now I know it's been quite a length of time, but I wanted to make sure that I had the insurance all figured out before I released any information. So in this video I want to kind of cover 3 or 4 things. First one's going to be kind of what happened and to show you the story and the footage that I do have, what I've learned since the incident, including insurance, and what I'll be doing better in the future to help prevent fires, and also some of the new gear that I carry. So here's the story about what happened, and then I'm going to show you the footage that I do have of that evening. So I was out in the Central Oregon desert filming some homestead sites like I usually do, and it was about 6 o'clock at night. Now on one of the homestead sites that I went and found, there was a main road and then a whole bunch of sagebrush where the site was with no road leading to it, so I had to kind of blaze my own trail over to that homestead, which means I had to drive through the sagebrush, not on a road. Now normally when I'm out overlanding, I can smell like hot sage underneath the Bronco. That's usually pretty normal. And I always check to make sure I don't have anything smoking underneath, and I never do. And it's been a couple of years, so I've never really had a fire problem. But this time when I pulled into camp, I noticed a really strong smell of smoke, and I knew that the Bronco was on fire. So as soon as I got out of the Bronco, I looked underneath it immediately, and I noticed that the skid plate, on the front half of the fuel tank, there's a skid plate, and there's a bunch of brush kind of stuck between the fuel tank and the skid plate, and that brush was on fire, and there was fire coming out of the skid plate. So I quickly ran to the back of the Bronco where I had a 2.5 pound BC Purple K fire extinguisher. Went ahead and hit it with the extinguisher, fire went out real quick. So about 4 minutes went by and I took out the camera. I started doing a little bit of filming on what just happened. So when I was done filming a little clip, I went back underneath to kind of reinvestigate where the fire was, to kind of push out some of the embers and things that were on top of the skid plate. And I noticed like a stream of water coming out. Well, 2 streams of water actually. It turns out that I had 2 small pinholes in the fuel tank where it had melted, and now I had a fuel leak that I couldn't stop. Now I tried everything to stop the fuel tank. I didn't have any soap to rub it on or plug and patch or anything like that. All I had was basically some sticks I kind of shaved into toothpicks, tried to plug the holes, but I couldn't get to them because the skid plate was in the way, and I didn't have any big tools to remove the skid plate on the Bronco. So I knew then that I couldn't drive the Bronco, so I piled up a bunch of dirt on top of the skid plate. I piled a huge amount of dirt underneath the Bronco to just kind of soak up whatever fuel was coming out. Now my tent was on top of the Bronco, so there's no way I'm sleeping on top of a car with a leaking fuel tank. So I took all my crap out of the Bronco, put it underneath the tree, and I just stayed the night underneath the juniper tree. So I managed to get service to call 911, and I called 5 different phone numbers they gave me for tow companies. Now out of the 5 numbers I called, I got called from 2 companies. One couldn't make it out for a couple of days. And the one that could arrive the next day was Sean from Bard Towing. So Sean was able to load the Bronco up onto the back of the tow truck, kind of at an angle so it wasn't leaking fuel. And then I got my tow to bend, and then my wife had to come pick me up. So I'm going to go ahead and climb under the Bronco and show you guys exactly where the fire was, because it was in kind of a bizarre place and there's not really a whole lot of ignition sources around it. But maybe you guys can kind of come to some conclusion about what happened to help me out. Okay, so what you're looking at right here is underneath the passenger door, and if I come straight down here, you'll see a skid plate right here. And right in there is going to be the fuel tank, the front of the fuel tank. Hopefully you can see that okay. And right in that gap where all that sagebrush had collected, right there in that gap, that is where the fire was. So I had fire coming out lapping out from the top of the skid plate here and on the other side. So before we dive into the cost of the repairs and insurance, I want to show you what I did get on video out there. And what it's going to be is me stopping in camp. I put the fire out, which I did not get on camera, and then right after the fire happened, which I did get on camera, and then a little bit of the footage when I was just sitting out there waiting for a tow. All right, so I just stopped in a spot where I had marked that there's an old well up here, and this is something I found on Google Earth. And you can see here, there's no road getting up here. I just kind of blazed my own trail from the road all the way up here through the sagebrush. And well, I had to cut over Grassy Butte to get where I'm going to camp tonight, so I figured I'd stop up here and show you what it is real quick. So for those of you that don't carry fire extinguishers in your vehicles, and especially Broncos that have the skid plates underneath, I'll give you a good reason why you should. Now for the past couple of years, when I'm driving around, whenever I stop, I can smell kind of hot juniper. But I always look under the rig and I never see any smoke or anything. But this time I pulled into camp And when I got out, it was strong. So as soon as I got out, I looked directly under the vehicle on the driver's side and I had flames underneath the Bronco. All right, so the fire was coming from right there. So this is the passenger front tire. If you look underneath, that skid plate right there was full of juniper all up in there, which isn't unusual for me because I usually always have juniper stuck up in here. But this particular time, there was fire coming out of the driver's side and this side coming out of there. So going over here to the driver's side, so I got out immediately, looked underneath the rig because it was a really strong smell. And it was right up in here. And you can see that all the skid plates are full of juniper, and that's not, once again, it's not unusual for me, but whew, close. All right, it looks like I have an actual bigger problem here. I've got fuel coming out right there. That's fuel, so that's probably fuel dropping, not water. All right, good morning, everybody. It's the next day since the fire we had last night underneath the Bronco. So I didn't really feel like having a Viking funeral last night in case this thing burst into flames. So I ended up sleeping on the ground, kind of off to the side of the Bronco, just in case. Now, having extinguishers like having a spare tire, you're kind of like, well, I'm probably never going to use it. But when you need it, you freaking need it. Now, you don't want to just let your car go unless you're parked in the middle of a glacier. You know, you're going to start a wildland fire, and you don't want a fully involved car, because if you have a fully involved car, you're going to be chasing spot fires all night long, trying to keep the thing contained. So for all of you that say, just let it go, okay, that's your call. Now, I don't know if you guys follow the Coyote Works channel, but he had a fire a few years ago in his Jeep, and his entire Jeep burnt down, and he ended up chasing spot fires out there for like 2 or 3 hours after the fire lit. Now, the total cost of the repairs ended up being $2,500, with $1,700 of that being the cost of the tank. Now, the cost of a tow was about an hour's drive from where I was into Bend, ended up costing about $750. So what I ended up doing basically was just calling Geico, which is my insurance company, and I called them up and said, hey, here's what happened, told them the story. So I opened up a claim, put the story in the claim, added some photos, and then they sent out an investigator. And the investigator, they said it's pretty normal. Anytime you have a fire in a vehicle, it's normal for them to send out an investigator, which kind of makes sense because if I call Geico and say, hey, I'm in the middle of the desert, I got a car on fire, I can understand that'd be a little suspicious. So one thing that's interesting I want to tell you guys to pass along about insurance, and I know a lot of you guys already know this stuff, but I sort of did, but I didn't do the right thing. So when the investigator was looking at the Bronco, he says, hey, do you have the fuel tank and tire carrier and the rooftop tent, roof rack, winch, lights, blah, blah, blah? Do you have all that covered? And I said, well, no, isn't that covered with the car? And he says, no, you got to do something different for that. So basically, if I would have lost the Bronco, I would have lost everything. They would have replaced the Bronco, but they would not have done anything to help replace all my accessories, which is probably about $5,000 worth of crap bolted onto this thing. So basically what you do is you just call up your insurance company and you say, hey, I need to add a few accessories for my Overland vehicle to be covered by insurance. And what you do is you submit a photograph of that thing you're going to cover and also a receipt. And of course, you don't have to cover every little thing if you don't want to. I didn't cover all the small stuff like the winch and the fuel tank. All I really covered was the rooftop tank, because that's like $3,000. So at the end of the whole thing, I ended up using my credit card, which is a Ford credit card, so that I get the points off it. I went ahead, made the repairs, paid the tow bill, and about a month later, I get a check from Geico to help pay for the damages. So with all that being said, let me show you some of the changes I made to the Bronco to help prevent something like this from happening again, and also some new gear I'm carrying in case it does happen again. So let's talk about 3 gear changes that I've made since the fire. Now, the first thing I was not prepared for that I should have been prepared for is a fuel leak. So one thing I'm carrying now is the same thing that I have used before. I've used it at work, and so I know it works, but I went ahead and went on Amazon and I bought one for myself, and that is a plug and dyke premix plug patty. Now this stuff's pretty cool because it basically is a big glob of clay. It just comes out as a patty. And even if the hole is like the size of a quarter and it's just pouring out fluid on like a plastic tank, you just shove it on there and push as hard as you can, just squish it in, and it will stop the flow of fuel. Now I've seen this stuff work, and I know that it does work on plastic. Even if it's got fuel and kind of oily residue on that plastic, it will still plug the hole. So this is something that I carry in my first aid kit, which I just have a first aid kit like this that I just keep stuffed back here behind the fire extinguisher. And I just keep it right there so I can get to it quick. Now the second thing is mitigating the problem with having debris on my skid plates. Now I know that it's not good to have debris on your skid plates, and every time I'm out there, especially when it's warm, I can smell hot sage underneath the vehicle. It's just something that normally people do smell. I just never thought it'd burst into flames. So I went ahead and looked on Amazon for something that I could use to kind of blow out my skid plates, something battery powered. I found a pretty cool thing. Now for about 50 bucks, you can get this thing, and I'll have links to all the things I'm talking about in the description below, so you can buy all this stuff if you want. This is a little handheld fan, and it has like a jet engine in it, a nice little cone, and this cone actually pops off, and this thing blows a ton of air, and it charges through USB. Now I used this on my last trip, and it did work really well. I was able to blow out all 3 skid plates over and over again, so it lasts for quite a while, and it truly does work. I mean, that's a lot of air coming out of there. And one thing I will say is that this little fan does like to be charged. If it gets low on charge, it'll just do more of a spurt, and it won't actually continue going. So you want to keep this thing plugged in most of the time in your car if you're going to be using it often. Now to talk one more time about the skid plates, I do stop and bend every time I leave the Central Oregon Desert and head back to Sherwood. Every time I stop and bend, I pressure wash the entire vehicle. Underneath the vehicle, I get all the skid plates cleaned out, but I can't really do that when I'm out in the field. So I do take care of my skid plates, but it's difficult to do it when you're out overlanding. So the last thing that I changed was my complement of fire extinguishers. Now that day I had 1 fire extinguisher. I had a 2.5 pound BC Purple K fire extinguisher, and that was the only extinguisher I had because honestly, I thought the only type of fire I was going to have was probably going to be something in the engine compartment, probably related to fuel. So after the event happened, I did a little bit of thinking. I thought, you know, the BC Purple K is great for the fuel and fire underneath the vehicle, but what happens if it gets up into the vehicle and I have more things burning than just fuel? So I went ahead and added a second fire extinguisher. This is a 2.5 pound ABC dry chemical. Now both these extinguishers are going to be great on fuel fires, but this one I like because it specializes a little bit more in fuel, and this one does a pretty good job with kind of all around everything. I'm not going to go into a lot of scientific detail about, you know, BC Purple K fire extinguishers versus an ABC dry chemical. I'm not going to go into detail about that because if I do, I'm just going to get picked apart by every single firefighter out there. Now in my career, I've seen quite a few car fires, but I will tell you that it's an entirely different story when it's your car. So this is the complement of fire extinguishers I'm going to be carrying from now on, and you don't have to do it, but it's just what I chose to run with. So once again, over here is a 2.5 pound ABC dry chemical, and over here is a 2.5 pound BC Purple K. Now, if you're wondering what I'm using to strap these onto the C-pillar, this is from Badass, I think it's Badass Moto Gear, and I've had the one on the BC for like 2 years, and I can tell you that these straps work really well. The extinguishers don't move at all, and I can also tell you that they're very quick to deploy. You just pop off these 3 straps, and the extinguisher just pulls right out. So it holds the extinguisher nice and secure, and I've had very, very good luck with these straps. Now, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, so I don't get any kickback, but I'm going to have links to those items that I talked about in the video down below. So hopefully this video helped you out. If it did, maybe give it a like, subscribe for more Bronco content. We'll see you next time.